Thank you very much for that, Kallio. And I guess just to sort of to riff off that, in framing your response the way that you did, Peter and I had a little chat today, and it sort of helps language sustainability of a project, right? Because it speaks to the architectural makeup of a thing, and how do you develop that, and how do you go from places beyond what we're sort of imagining right now. And but I also want to just pull on a thread a little bit about something that you said with Behind the Flag or the Ndakunikwila. And maybe I could, Simi, if that's okay with you, if I could ask you this question. So in situating the VU, like this exhibition has, how do you think we call to unlearn, reimagine, recalibrate, and maybe reconcile our relationship to histories, right?
I wish you had given that question in essay form to me last week. Spaces like these is a starting point. I mentioned earlier this evening that sharing stories was once a cultural trait in Fiji, in the local communities, but the storytelling has been usurped by the good old gadgets and the fragmenting of the people who tell stories and those who are supposed to listen to the stories has happened, and knowledge transmission is halted. So the challenge is to duplicate these spaces and also translate it, demystify, democratize, whatever the word is, and invite the communities or take it to them. I, for one, later Kallio mentioned about the cultural mapping. That was the work I mentioned, the life I did from 8 to 4. So for information, cultural mapping, just think of the word audit, cultural audit. So we went from 2004 till last year, just asking questions and capturing knowledge about what traditional knowledge. One of the many of the communities we go to, when it comes to the spiritual side of knowledge, it is never expressed openly, but they express it this way to our field workers, and this is what they say: "Ngome nomunga, this is just for your ears," and that's the sharing that is done metaphorically behind closed doors. There is sharing divulging, but it's not done confidently because of those metaphoric stones that will be thrown at us, of trying to open up some Pandora's box. Yeah, so art appeals to young, and this would be the bridge, in my view, that could begin extending and inviting our locals to come and express. Yeah. But that is not an answer. That is just a response to your question, which could be better. But for now, thank you.
I mean, like this is the beautiful thing about art, right? Is like art helps us build out what we don't understand. Right? So in having these conversations, it's less about getting to a specific, this is the correct response. It's more about how do we sort of let us stay present in that in-between and sort of have spaces for this ongoing conversation, these dialogues. Because I think if we, like, most people create art, poetry, music, whatever it is, with a hope of trying to better understand something and figure it out, and also just be present with it. It's in the room. It's real, right? It doesn't just exist in some mystical place. So it's a bringing out of that. So I think that our response was perfect. Thank you very, very much. I think maybe I want to come to you now, Ariella. I'm just so curious to hear from you. You sent through a couple of things that we could chat about tonight, and I think the most important one that I think is important to speak to is just from the perspective of an Indigenous woman. I'd love to hear your reflections and reactions to Vu and why.
Thank you, Fenton. How long do I have now? Okay, so both Master Simi and Mr. Tavola, they've touched a little on indigenous knowledge or what Vu would mean for a Fijian indigenous person. When I first heard that it was Vu and then the poster didn't really help, a lot of questions came up, because growing up in Fiji, all of us, we negotiate two spaces. There's this duality where, as someone from the village and a small town, and then made my way to Suva, so just coming through with an open mind. But these things are fundamental, these beliefs that the two gentlemen have sort of alluded to. So there has been a lot of unlearning as an individual in terms of, just accepting or being curious about other forms of art that one did not grow up with or one did not see while growing up in Fiji. And I did sing a turka, la turka suva. So I'd like to think I did a kind of a good spread of experience there. Anyway, so for me it was taken aback a little, and of course the question about the conjuring, because in some villages we can't even utter some of the names that we now see on the walls, because for us it is to call. Yeah. And so sometimes you might hear some jokes around the grog bowl, like if you're giving up and your friends will say, here go, we'll pour one below for you and call your name, or call someone. So there's a banter about it, but it is an innate piece of indigenous, yes, of an indigenous person. Most of what I know from where I come from and all that, it has all been passed orally from grandparents, from aunties. Sometimes you are taught about where you came from or some of the characteristics of uncles and all that by a story that you never heard before. But apparently it's been part of this collective memory from your family or Tikin or Matangali and stuff like that. So for me, that was the first thing about VU, or about an exhibition that was touching an area that we don't even talk about. But I'm also a history student at university. I did history and politics, and so history has always been a really area of interest for me. Anything about history, I'm really. We can all agree. I think it's safe to say that some books that were written, like 50s, 40s, even. When I'm trying to read it, I'm like fighting mandanga with what's being said about the indigenous community that the observer is. So you have to continuously like check yourself. Say, this was the narrative at the time. So as a history student, I've also had to open up a lot more than I think maybe some of my friends. But this is the second thing about this exhibition. It's really, it challenges what you know to be true, but also having come or having you've read a lot and you've come through university, tertiary education. There's this thing, because I've had people say, oh my God, you people make up so much about this spirituality thing. It doesn't even exist. But we all know that we've all experienced things that speak to this collective spiritual life. So I totally agree with how I hope as well that the exhibition will create a lot more discussion around and maybe unlearning to a certain point in terms of the Christian beliefs that we've all had to grow up with, and that it didn't how we were taught growing up in the Christianity is all things that you hear from the elders are all bluff, and you really shouldn't talk about it. And so for me, the exhibition was encouraging in that way, and I hope that. Growing up, I was shoved a lot of books. Grew up a little bit with my maternal grandparents, so I just had books in front of me. So the love for reading was so. I consider myself privileged to love reading, and I like to see that. When I see Fijian, especially Fijian children reading, I really, I appreciate the learning, the parenting that's put in it. So anyway, to cut things short, those were my initial reactions. A big yes, but then also, oh my God, it might be reflected in the fact that the piece I bought from this exhibition is not one of the VU per se. It's a representation of what Tuets have has imagined to be mana, and it's really about mana rather than. So maybe unconsciously, I really didn't want to take a VU with me home at the end of this exhibition. So yeah, lots of innate. Not so much unlearning, but freeing of things that you grew up with in order to accept what you can. And because if you don't open up a little bit, you lose so much more in terms of learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariella. And I guess just as a quick follow-up, you spoke a little bit about how you sort of live in this duality. You have this dance with duality, and you're constantly negotiating spaces. And as somebody who has had access to reading and all of these things, sorry, let me try and be clear with my question here. As somebody who has had to dance with duality, right, where one part is you having this very real responses and reactions as an Indigenous woman, and on the other side of that, you're purchasing art. Right? And last night we had a really interesting conversation, that involved Aaron, one of the artists, and I think the way that you were described as you're a collector, right? So a collector's perspective, a collector's of art. How does that sort of sit with you and somebody who supports the purchasing of arts? How does this all sort of like, yeah, sit with you?
Okay, so the gang that I hung out with last night heard that I have an issue with the word collector, because that's how Peter Sipeli presented it. He said, I need you to come and talk about, you're a collector of Aaron's work. Patronage is a bit closer to it. Aaron, it really, when we used to live together, he was a barman in Traps, and I was a freelance media communications person. So I did all my work from home, and it just happened that so he'd come home at say 3 or 4, and then I'd wake up, and so we worked in the middle of the morning, so to speak, like from 4, we're like little owls downstairs there. Most people know the house we lived in as the Vo studio. We lived downstairs, and I don't know how people, I think they all knew that there was nothing valuable in there. We didn't have louvers. It was like really lovely colonial place. Anyway, so he'd come in late, and then we'd work together, me in the room writing because I wrote for, like, say, the national airlines and stuff like that. I was a full-time student, paying my way through school, really. And that's how we worked. And then for me, it was just Aaron doing his thing. So eventually one time he said, okay, I'm really broke. Can you buy these 2 pieces, please? So that's how it really started. I kind of stumbled into collecting. But I appreciate that time of my life, because I really, I lived with someone who really was into his thing. The colors you see that Aaron uses in this exhibition, it's nothing new. He's always played with colors way back. I have a few pieces at home that a little bit of Cubanism's coming in, some sharp edges. So for him, for this one, I think it might be the first exhibition of Aaron's that's been a lot more prescriptive, if you will. But I'm used to him working on commissioned pieces, or just when he's, in the mood, and really when he needed to make money. So it started from there, really, like almost organic, if you will. And with Aaron, there's George, and George lived upstairs. So I was in a privileged space, if you will. I lived with artists who taught the children that men stay at home and women go to work. There's so many. But just to cut things short, it started like that. And being in that space, and Lambert would come visiting or spend some couple of weeks doing work. So I kind of grew up in that space, watching these artists who are like really fancy now and having their own exhibitions. But we were all broke at one time, and we all lived together down this way.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess the whole idea with this is creators, as they create something, they put so much of themselves in it, so much of their truth. And so they're like, you don't need to necessarily purchase art to be a steward of the truth. You know what I mean? There's ways in which you can support them in many, many different ways. And I guess the hope with the exhibition is, how do you make this as accessible as possible? How do you create these spaces where people can have a relationship to art? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. You also asked about, after all these things I said before, but I also purchase art. Part of it is really friends who have come up with new things, because before there was no space like this, it was when then Oceania started at USP, so that was, but then it then quickly became, it was a moving, fluid space, that one too. There was visual arts, and then a lot of people remember Oceania more for the dance, because that became the dominant form of art. So for some of us, that's how our friends made money at the time. They would finish a piece or something, or we're visiting, and they'd say, oh, I finished a couple of pieces. And so I don't want to say that because it didn't feel like I was helping people. Because I don't think, even if you're coming from, if you're invited to, oh, why don't you just look at these 3 pieces? If the art doesn't speak to me, I don't buy. But I've been really lucky in that way that, Craig and Lambert and these guys, when they do their thing, they come up with some really fantastic pieces that leaves you no choice. So, but the purchasing has kind of continued. But my issue with a collector thing is to be a collector also almost implies there's money, there's wealth, it's a fancy, it's people who are collectors, whatever. The greatest thing about growing up in this space here in Fiji is you connect. You really can, the art that you are given, you connect in some way. And like the VU, yes, you connect, even though I'm trying to guise the VU and buy the one that kind of talks more about mana. But yes, I think that's the joy of being from here and seeing art that's coming out from here, is that it speaks to you in a lot of ways, not just as a person who's gone to school, but as an indigenous person who would get some of the stuff that you're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariella. And I guess we sort of unfortunately have to start winding down a little bit. But before we do that, if it's okay, we could just go to the audience and see if anyone in the audience had like a question that they're burning to ask, or just a reflection that they want to have live outside of their bodies. The invitation is there for you to do that. A response to the response, if you will. Okay, great. Silence is great. There's a lot to take in, right? We all process in different ways. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for those responses. It's I think very interesting and very precious to hear actually reflections on the role of arts as well in sharing spirituality that has been actually pushed away for a long time because of the colonial history of Fiji. I'm quite interested to know what you think might be now the place of, and I'm sorry if I missed that, I arrived a little bit late, if ever you mentioned that, but what's the place of storytelling and the power of the spoken word? I know we talked about visual arts, and of course it has a lot of power as well, but I wonder what you think is still the power in telling stories face to face to an audience or to the relevant audience in the right context in particular village at a particular time, and what is unique in that experience that I would miss as not being part of the Fijian society and maybe looking at a piece of art or hearing about it on the social media or I don't know. So I'm interested in the spoken word and how the ancient tradition of storytelling is actually what does it bring nowadays to an Itokai person in the 21st century? Really?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. Je parle en français un petit peu, c'est dommage, ça fait longtemps. I thank you for your question. This Friday, I will be going to the ancient capital of Verata Kingdom. The name of the village is Udunivanua. Our cultural audit, that's the last village. We finished the cultural audit last year, but there was some pending issues with this village, and our field officers are there as we speak. And the conclusion is this Friday. I have been asked from our section of the I work with the Institute of Fijian Language and Culture. And our director is new. He's just become director in like 3 weeks now. And he has asked me to come with me to that village. Now, our director, he has ancient paths. Once upon a time, his ancestors came from that same village. He's clearing the path. He wants to go back in his position, professional position as director, and in his traditional position. And when he asked me if I could do the traditional presentation, I said to him, the universe has timed this correctly. I will, because I'm a speaker, I'm a mataki, I'm the envoy, I speak. I will research your history, your lineage, your travel. And in the presentation of the whale's tooth, I will then articulate it to the home community, how you are connected. And I will, because I belong to the home community by extension, I will call up all of the gods and the histories from them and connect it with our director. And that is the traditional oratory, the power of the spoken word in the culture. And I'm thankful for you for bringing it up. So as far as the spoken word is concerned, for us, it's the traditional ceremonies where the oratory brings the connection. So if we go anywhere, we in any village, we must know the unwritten part of the history, the oral history, and re-articulate that and verbalize it and reclaim it orally to make the connection clear. So storytelling happens, but it happens at this level of traditional ceremony. It's not the storytelling, it's the highest pivot of speaking. It's our version of traditional diplomacy, where words are spoken, metaphors are referred to, genealogies, histories, that they are just brought up to connect the emotion and the soul. So yes, I'm thankful for your question, because there will be something like that, which has never happened in a long time in my life, for these planets to come together and connect the history, the language, the spirituality, from my director and my role as a traditional speaker / storyteller this Friday. Thank you.
Anybody else want to respond?
Just to add that there'll always be a place for spoken words, always. And I think that's one of the not so much friction, but when I imagine that, and that's in reference to what he had said earlier, that's why it's a bit difficult sometimes to talk to you and see you writing these things and recording it. I think it takes something out of this. You know, I mean, I imagine, because during the walkabout, if I can use that phrase, some have shared and some have just outrightly said, that's not something we can share. But to respond to your question, yes, there'll always be a place for spoken words. We kind of grew up with it, and that's how knowledge and our, this collective memory exists, because we speak it, and it continues to nurture this collective knowledge. But back to the visual arts, it's probably the first time people are going to see a name of ancestral god with a face. I'm not sure how, if we were to take it to the village, the reaction or response to it. Yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Mr. Tao, did you also want to respond, or?
I mean, Simi has talked about oratory, and Fijian oratory at its best, it is beautiful. I'm supposed to be an orator myself, like Simi. Mataki Verata, I'm head of the family now. I'm supposed to be the Mata in Burmasanga, from where I come from. But I'm no orator, Fenton. I've never lived in the village for too long. I've traveled too far and too wide. But my father was a beautiful orator. And he didn't teach me the skill to be an orator myself. But one of my nephews is a beautiful orator who's taken the skills of my father. But true, when you listen to Fijian oratory, it's poetry.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I guess we've sort of doing a lot of looking back. We've been looking back historically, and maybe just to close things off, we could do a bit of forward, future visioning, do a bit of time travel into the future a little bit. And I guess to sort of frame my question for you a little bit, I'm just reminded of a story from back in the day, a story that a lot of people have probably heard of, and it's the story about Noah's Ark from the Bible. And like today, Noah and his people were also living in some sort of crisis, and it was the end of the world. It was some sort of apocalypse, and Noah was called to take things onto the vessel into the future, right, an ark. So he's called to take all these different animals and whatnot. And so I guess just to wrap things up, when the sort of, we were living through COVID-19, some sort of an apocalypse, what do you think you should be carrying into the vessel of the future?
Me?
You're the closest to me.
Ladies first.
You didn't say that. To the ark. Man, you should have warned us about this question. Because right now I'm thinking books and yeah, but by then we probably will be able to have, books are digital now, so I hope to still have my faculties and be able to talk about what life has been. But yeah, I think for me it's really the knowledge vessel that's in fashion at the time, I'm taking that.
My interpretation of what Fenton is asking, the ark. The ark to me is the project. The VU and an art exhibition. Now the question is, where is it going? Where is the ark heading? Where is the future? When I presented my presentation, I talked about the developing on an organic kind of a thing that is still growing. Peter talks about parts 2 and parts 3. To me, that's the future. We have to sail to the future. One thing that we have to do as a group is to bring in the ideas and the animals and different kind of animals so that we can have a community that can come up with ideas to fill up or to populate parts B and parts C. To me, that is the future where we're heading, and we appreciate your views on this because we need to know how to have parts B and part C to this project. But I've said to Peter that there are possibilities. One thing that we cannot throw out of the ark at this stage is the idea of a publication. Yeah. So the publication could be part 3. And what I want to take to the ark is someone that can visualize a book that can be part 3 of this project.
Thank you. For me, I remember the words of Eli Wiesel. He mentioned, and I quote, "Without memory, there is no culture." So for me, it's digging back, bringing back the memories. And as I look back into the indigenous Toke communities, if I may, equate the traditional roles to offices. Office. We have office of the president of the. So the chief is the office of the executive. There's the office of the crafts, the office of the fisherfolk. The one who connects all those is the office of the speakers, the heralds. That's the one who's the personal assistant to the chief. Then there exists another office where Kalyo and I, the outside envoys. So in all the schematic of things, the speakers still matter. They're the institution of speaking, of articulating. So going forward, what we are just doing here, telling the stories, discussing, conversing this way, this is the speaking part. That is crucial. Far too long in the local landscape, the performing arts, whatever arts, they have been there silent. No one speaks, but the speaking must be done in order for everything to be framed, understood, respected, and revered. So this boat actually has the speakers, has the artists. It's already the animals are already on board. Yes, Vinaka.
All right, thank you all so much for reminding us that contemporary art is a portal, right, to things that haven't been given a voice before. So I think it's really important to hold on to that. And I guess I want to close off with something Peter shared with me a little earlier, and it was a reflection on how grateful he is for Atueta and Aaron and all the work that they've done. And the way Peter described it was he gave this project to them. And they basically painted their ways out of their depth. And I guess the hope for this is we can continuously use art as a way to bring us out of depth, right? To sit with things that we're uncomfortable with and figure out ways in which we can keep engaging in conversation around that. Thank you very, very much for coming tonight. And again, if we could show our appreciation to the panelists.